So, well, good morning to one and all. I should like to convene this meeting of the New York State DNA Subcommittee. I should like to welcome members of the committee and members of the public and members of the crime laboratory community. New York Police Department, I see, is here. We have a unique situation today. We not only have a quorum, we have every member of the DNA subcommittee present. And these members include Drs. Batzer, Eastman, Bieber, Hirsch, Buell, Kidd, and myself, Ballantyne. I should like to welcome Dr. Bieber, who was appointed and was present at the last meeting via phone call. He was present in spirit but not body, but now you're here in body and spirit, and it's nice to see you. Thank you very much. The first item on the agenda is review and approval of the meeting agenda, and the committee members have a draft agenda in front of them, and we did receive this plenty of time for this meeting. So if
I approve. I motion to approve.
Motion to approve the agenda. Second. Any discussion? All those in favour, raise your hand. Say aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Move ahead. So the next item is the review and approval of the draft minutes from the last meeting, December the 2nd, Friday, December the 2nd, 2011. And again, we have the draft minutes that we were able to review prior to the meeting.
I motion to approve the minutes.
Second. Any discussion? All those in favour of accepting the minutes, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. So the first substantive item on the agenda is Westchester County Department of Labs and Research. And what we have is Westchester County is basically coming up for reaccreditation, and so we have documents, civil documents. Do we have Westchester County here?
There on the phone, we have Elaine Schwartz, the DNA technical leader, and Linda Duffy, the QA manager.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Also Bob Adamo, the director.
Okay. Good morning. So we have the documents in front of us, and we've been able to review the documents. So I should like to open up this item for discussion by the committee. Does the committee have any questions or comments?
I just have a question. I have this on the table and this in the binder.
They have a new scope, and I just got the document on yesterday, so I just handed it out. You'll notice that there's they removed the individual characteristic databases from the biology.
Okay.
There's a couple other changes as well, but that's the one that concerns this group. So that has been removed, and that the new scope does not reflect that's being accredited.
And I should point out to the committee that this will require a vote today of some sort. So that's the one item on the agenda where we will be required to vote on New York State accreditation for Westchester. So compared to the other items on the agenda with the other labs, this is one that's substantive in terms of their accreditation status. So this individual characteristic database, is this a new scope that ASCLD lab has, or is it something I'm not aware of particularly myself?
I don't know if it's that new, but it's relatively within a few years. We see that in latent print maybe as well. Is there anything where the laboratory is in control of the database? The accrediting body wants to make sure that it's listed under their scope. And so the issue with, I think, with Westchester, and I'll let Westchester obviously answer for this, but whether, I think in their case, it was a dormant database. Elaine, do you want to address that further?
Yeah, Linda's going to address that.
The question came up is whether we had a suspect database. We did at one time, but it's been years since we've added anything or searched it. Fred had issued a policy of not using it, so it's protected, but it's dormant, and we were able to answer all ASCLD's questions relating to it, and they agreed that we should not have that on the scope, so that's why it was removed.
Okay. So, does the committee have any comments or questions regarding the documentation we've had?
I had one mostly just point of information for me. Under the DNA, it's nuclear. That includes Y, but not mitochondria. Is that my correct interpretation?
This is Elaine Schwartz. Yes, that is correct.
I guess I have one more question.
Yes?
What happened to the profiles on that individual database? Did you expunge them, or are they still there?
They're actually, so they're, the actual physical samples are still protected with the rest of our older evidence in storage. Profiles are in a protected file on the server, the CODA server, not accessed.
Okay. I should like to welcome the new commissioner for of DCGS, Mr. Mike Green. And hello, Mr. Green.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And my apologies for being late.
No problem. So actually, this is a substantive item. So I have a proposed motion in terms of for voting purposes, and the proposed motion would be the following: Dear Acting Commissioner Green, at the March 23rd, 2012 New York State DNA Subcommittee meeting, the DNA Subcommittee voted to make a binding recommendation to grant the Westchester County Department of Laboratories and Research Division of Forensic Sciences New York State accreditation for the discipline of biology, based upon our review of the ASCLD lab and quality assurance audit for forensic DNA laboratories conducted during the period September 12 to 16, 2011. This approval will run concurrent with the ASCLD lab cycle, which will run through September 29th, 2016. So I suppose before that motion, I suppose we should take a vote on whether to approve the accreditation, continued accreditation of the lab first, and that would be a proposed motion thereafter, or we could do both at the same time.
I motion that we approve the accreditation.
As stated. Yeah. So any discussion on this, on what I just said? If not, all those in favour of this motion, that this would be the letter sent to Mr. Green, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. And congratulations, Westchester County.
Thank you, Governor.
Okay, what we have now is a series of laboratory audits, mainly internal audits. There is one external audit from the various laboratories. So from each of the laboratories in the state, we have documents regarding their annual internal or external DNA audits. The first one that we have is New York City Office of Chief Medical Examiner, and we have documentation from them. So if there's any comments or questions from committee members regarding the OCME's internal audits, then please speak now.
I had one question on the technical leader contingency plan.
Yes, can you just state your name for the record? Thank you.
Eugene Lin, OCME Technical Leader.
There's, in your DNA technical administrative manual, it mentions about a deputy DNA tech leader.
That's correct.
And this is divided up into nuclear and mitochondrial.
That's correct.
Do they both have sufficient experience in the other area? I mean, I'm not sure if a nuclear person would have the background necessary to do the mito. I'm just curious how it works.
The mitochondrial DNA Technical Leader is trained in mitochondrial DNA and is sufficiently experienced to be able to be a technical leader for that discipline.
But if you have it sounds like you've got a nuclear DNA tech and then a mito.
Yes.
But if one's gone, if the mito is gone, can the nuclear person step over and take over? As I understand the procedure for the mito unit, if that nuclear person doesn't have the background in mito, or is there a requirement for that? You see where I'm coming?
Are they cross-trained?
Are they cross-trained? Yeah.
No, they're not. This would be an interim solution to have the nuclear tech lead replace the mito tech lead to give us time to identify a new individual. It's actually based on the accreditation standard, not required that the technical leader is technically competent and proficient in the subdiscipline. There are educational requirements in place, and it has to be obviously a practitioner, but the competency in itself is not required.
So
of course, we're aiming for the competency. So when our mito technical leader left, the new person we appointed, we made sure that he was also then competent and is now taking proficiency tests. But for the interim solution, we're not aiming.
Yeah. But this person would have the same authority as, right? So I mean, could they? I'm just looking at how it all works. That if there was a problem in the mito unit, would this person be able to shut down your unit and say, "Hey, hold off"? Be able to recognize the problem, shut down the unit, and say, "Hey, we've got an issue here, and we better resolve it before we go forward." So it just fundamentally how it all works, and then if you see where I'm coming from, yeah.
I do see where you're coming from, and as the nuclear DNA technical leader, I know my boundaries. If the mitochondrial DNA technical leader is out and cannot be contacted, obviously if there's something that can wait, I will have to wait for him to return for me to make a decision. However, based on, in terms of troubleshooting as a nuclear DNA technical leader, to know what to do and the experience that I have in being able to troubleshoot nuclear DNA issues, I can relay that experience onto mitochondrial DNA. And if I need to shut down, if I see that there's a gross issue, for example, let's say contamination, I know that that's a big issue that I would, based on my experience in nuclear DNA, I should shut down mitochondrial DNA until the director or the mitochondrial DNA technical leader comes back to make a determination as to what to do. It's an interim solution. It's not meant for long term. If it was for long term, I would say that yes, I would need that training to be able to sustain that position. However, as an interim solution, and we're talking interim within 14 days, for example, should myself or the other technical leader go on vacation and out of the United States that can't be reached, this plan will be in place, but it is not meant for a long-term solution.
Okay.
At least your lab is very lucky. You have 2 technical leaders on staff.
Yeah.
Sure.
And we also have many people that do meet the educational requirements that we could train up and nominate.
Just as a bit of information, how much mitochondrial work is there compared to the nuclear?
So on the casework side, very, very little, but we are very active in typing unidentified human remains for the POTUS database. We do have a grant covering all of New York State to read submissions and other laboratories in the state as well.
Okay. Any other comments or questions?
I think I had one other thing, just I'll be quick. It was interesting where you had reagents come in and they're lot number X, and they don't have an out date, and you assign an out date, and later on you get the same lot in, and then you have to deal with the different expiration dates.
Right.
Yeah, could you just go through that just briefly? It's just a interesting scenario, just how you work that out.
This occurs if manufacturers assign a date and if manufacturers don't assign a date. When manufacturers don't assign a date, our internal policy is to assign an expiration date to it. So what we found through the internal audit was that if two lot numbers come in on different dates, then we would have different expiration dates. And that causes an issue for traceability at the end, because as you're going back to the case file and you see that this lot number is used, we don't know when it really expired. That being said, in terms of the manufacturer's side, if there are manufacturers out there who would quality control test their reagents on a periodic basis, and they would assign expiration dates based on those quality control tests, they would reuse lots. And for example, today they would quality control test something, and then they would assign a one-year expiration date. 3 months later, they would re-quality control test that exact same reagent with the exact same lot number, and then assign another year after that date. So again, that causes an issue in terms of traceability. So what we've decided as a laboratory is if the manufacturer would vouch for the reactivity of that reagent for it to be extended 1 year beyond the latest quality control testing, then we should also. So we have decided as a laboratory in terms of reagents that if there are two identical lots that come in with two different expiration dates, that would automatically extend all those lot numbers from the same manufacturer to the latest expiration date.
Yeah. Do you have to be concerned about storage conditions and that sort of stuff? Just thinking about that they may say, hey, based on the reason why we extended the date is because this was stored at such and such conditions.
Oh, absolutely.
You go ahead and put the same constraints on your old lots that you've had in order to do that?
For all of our analyses, we have controls to be able to verify that the reagents are working properly.
Yeah.
That is an additional step to ensure that storage conditions for the reagents are done correctly.
Yeah.
So for all the tests, we do evaluate the controls to ensure that reagents are working properly. There's no exogenous DNA that was added to the sample thereafter or anything like that. So, well, we do take that into consideration, but we felt that the controls are sufficient enough for us to be able to see whether or not the reagent is working properly.
Yeah, good. Interesting. It's a situation I hadn't heard about before. In a small laboratory, we get one reagent, and several years later we get another one, and usually it's gone, you know. Thank you. Sure.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Thank you, Jean and Nikki. So again, I think there's no vote on this or anything. This is just our review of the internal audits or external audits. No need for a vote. So, and the laboratories just take our comments and concerns and questions, if any, with under advisement type of thing. Okay, the next laboratory is Monroe County Crime Laboratory, and same thing. We have the documents in front of us, and we have representatives, I understand, from there if we need. Okay.
Janet, you want to state your names for the record?
Janet Anderson, Sequest Laboratory Administrator.
Ellen Calhoun, DNA Technical Leader.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I saw you at breakfast. Didn't realize it. Sorry, off the record now. So does the laboratory have, does the committee have any comments or questions for Monroe County based upon the documentation we have?
The only thing I saw, Jack, was on page 49, was 8.2.1, have developmental validation studies been performed and documented to include where applicable. You got marked yes and NA. I was just sort of curious.
I believe what the auditors may have been attempting to convey was, we had the supporting documentation for any developmental validations available. However, for this audit, there was no new technology that was brought online in which any sort of developmental validation was performed.
Oh, okay. So previous, you've got stuff that's for the past, appropriate for previous audits that's available, but nothing new this time.
That's correct.
Okay. That's it. That's fine.
I have a question about, I guess it's Appendix B. I mean, it's already confusing just in the way it's written, but on Section 2, it says documents whose personnel who are receiving the first external audit approval, who are receiving the first external audit approval. But this is an internal, there's some names listed here, and this is an internal audit. Do those names really go there? I mean, I interpret this, I've always interpreted this, that it's the current audit and they're getting their first review of their records, but it doesn't count if it's an internal, unless maybe it was a review during the internal, but it shouldn't be documented in here, maybe on a separate sheet or something.
I see your point, and I believe where they had taken this information from was documentation from our external audit. These individuals were listed on our external audit this year.
Okay. It's kind of confusing.
I agree.
Okay.
So, Ellen, with respect to the, this technician issue where the technicians were doing a PT once per year, well, that was in your QA document. But now they're doing it twice a year.
That's
Is that
correct.
right? Yeah. And that was just there were technicians in the process, and it was just they were regarded as being just part of that process, and it wasn't deemed necessary at that time to have them tested twice a year. What was the thinking behind that?
No, that was when I was putting together the manual. Given where they were in their training, I was thinking that they would just be performing one PT before then they were going to be coming online as full-fledged DNA analysts. And so I had that in mind when I was writing, and it was incorrect. The thing is, anybody who acts as a technician capacity at our laboratory will follow the semi-annual
Yes.
PT review.
Okay. And these were new people, these were new personnel?
Yes.
Yes. So. Any other questions or comments? Thank you very much, Ellen and Janet. The next laboratory is the New York State Police Forensic Investigation Center, and these are internal audits, one for the casework and one for the data bank, conducted last fall. And we have a representative here, Dr. Guzman from New York State, that we need his advice or comments.
There's additional remediation handed out today in the stapled section.
This is with respect to the data bank. This one, the one we just received.
Yeah, but the casework is also attached.
Oh, is it?
As well as that.
So, I'd like to open up for any comments or questions. None so far. Barry, there's a comment on one of the audits that talks about the, it's this relationship between New York State Police and DCGS, that aspect of who checks what type of thing. So what's the resolution of that right now? Where are we with regard to that issue?
The issue is, this is a fairly unique situation, I think maybe in the country, where the laboratory itself is not responsible for checking the offender's identifying information. That's done at the Division of Criminal Justice Services. And that's the way the system was set up initially, so that the data bank lab could always claim that we don't have access to that identifying information, we have the DNA data, and so we could cut that connection. So initially, this kind of threw the auditors off a little bit because they didn't know how to relate to it. And what the resolution was that we didn't have a protocol in place that described this relationship.
Yes.
So basically, all we had to do was write a few sentences that explained what the relationship was, and that resolved it. We subsequently had an NDIS assessment. They came in and they spent a week there, and we went through this process with them. They agreed with our sticks, basically.
So it's just a matter of writing down the policy.
They just wanted
the policy.
yes,
Yeah.
document.
Yeah, and they were happy with it. The NDIS is happy with it, and
yes.
yeah.
And
it seems to have worked. It seems to have worked perfectly fine in the state up to now as well. So
I think it's been working really good.
It's a smooth process, Barry.
It is.
Basically, you give them some information, and they go ahead and go forward with the checking and stuff.
Typically, the information that we need comes in on the submission, and then they have staff that checks that against the databases, and then they let us know when it's approved, and then we'll go ahead and analyze the sample. So we don't actually start a sample until we have it approved from DCGS.
Oh, really? Okay.
So it's a good system in that way, too.
Pretty rapid, pretty quick.
There's a day or two, I
Yeah,
think,
not
but,
bad.
I think it's worth it
Yeah.
on the bad side.
So just exactly what are they checking to give you the go-ahead?
Typically, the most important thing, of course, is the identity of the individual, and they have fingerprints and such that they can use to check that. But also that the sample, that the person that submitted the sample has a qualifying offense, that they should in fact be in the data bank, that they've committed a crime that qualifies them. That means that they have to give up a sample for us, basically.
one thing I didn't see in my documents, but I've contracted mine drastically, but I didn't see there was some finding under health and safety, a few conditions, but there was no. I didn't see any documents that talked about the corrective action, if any, or response. I just didn't. Is that what this is?
That was in there. Too.
Okay, that's what this document
Yes,
is.
that's
Why I didn't see it.
Absolutely.
It's now with us. So.
It's all there.
Could you just briefly, so it's this one health and safety, it's a very broad umbrella. So what did you basically do, Barry, just for the record, to correct these in a general sense?
We had a very conscientious auditor, which I appreciate because it's safe and it's important. So basically, we were very willing to take all the comments that she gave us and put them on record so that we could address them. As an example, she said that we hadn't a record for our bloodborne pathogen for that particular, for the year before. But that training, it turns out, we didn't have records. It's provided by the State Police Academy, and we had to get the records from them. And that happened after I closed the audit. So it happened 2 days after we got the records. So we did have the training. We hadn't yet had training for that year, so she made a comment that we didn't actually fulfill it for the year. We had training in the following month for bloodborne pathogens. So that took care of all the bloodborne pathogen things. There was, just quickly, for the section itself, we had a form that we're using for our late night walkthrough. At the end of each day, we have a person, the last person out is responsible for going through the laboratory, making sure that nobody's there by themselves, making sure everything's closed, all the chemicals are closed and equipment shut down. And that form hadn't been formally put into our open lab system. It was an uncontrolled document, so we had to make it a controlled document. So we did that, and that's been controlled for several months now. One of the other issues was, one of the things we use a lot, of course, is bleach, dilute bleach solution for decontamination and bench. And there were some bleach bottles where the baker label had degraded. These were heavily used all the time. It does happen. And apparently, this was in, we have evidence processing laboratories, and some of them aren't used very often. and apparently they were in those labs. And what also had happened is, since no one had used it for quite some time, it had passed the expiration date, because it's only good for a week. So that's all, basically what we had in section. In terms of the Forensic Investigations Center in general, not all the fire extinguishers, apparently, there was not a record for checking all the fire extinguishers. It was actually recorded on the wrong form. So we actually had to get a form again in open lab and get a formal form in place. So they've all been checked now. And there's a similar situation with our fire alarms, which is basically controlled by our quality assurance office. And we had to change the checklist for that to make sure that they were doing it on a regular basis. Those were the sorts of things that we dealt with. Most of it was putting new forms in place and making sure that they were official, controlled.
So is your laboratory a safer and better place as a result of this audit?
Absolutely.
Good.
Absolutely.
That's good.
Yes, I was impressed by what you called the diligence of the auditor, noting the evacuation maps were not up to date, et cetera.
Exactly.
Whoever looks at those.
Okay, any other comments or questions? No?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Barry? The next laboratory is Suffolk County Crime Lab. And we have a representative from Suffolk County Crime Lab. Would you like to state your name?
Joseph Galby, Suffolk County Crime Lab.
Two of these, did I steal yours? Huh. Okay.
So, any comments or questions for Suffolk County or about the Suffolk County documentation? Joe, there was some disclosure of non-compliance DNA proficiency test, and the records we have here says that it's still under corrective action, and we have no information yet as to how this has been resolved, or is it still
We're
undergoing?
wrapping up that procedure. We've done reanalysis of a number of samples. We've done a review of all the cases for the last year. The analyst has training, a competency test. So we're on the verge of completing it and getting her back on.
Yeah. And then you have to inform ASCLD.
Yes, that's good.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
Related to that, were a number of cases reanalyzed, Joe? I forgot.
We did actual reanalysis on samples from 8 different cases of hers based on how we reviewed the casework, whether it was necessary or not.
Yeah.
And all of the reanalysis came back with results that were consistent with the original analysis.
Yeah. Nothing else for me.
Nothing? We should have a button. That was easy. Thank you very much, Joe. The next laboratory is Onondaga County Center for Forensic Sciences.
We don't have anybody from Onondaga here or on the phone.
No one is here from there. But do we have any? We can still discuss the documentation and what we have if necessary.
I guess my question was, I wasn't sure how many folks they had in this laboratory. I have circled here that there was one auditor and it took her 1 day to do it, and I was just curious.
According to their checklist for general lab information, they have 4 DNA analysts, 1 DNA trainee. And that was my question too. I think it's kind of difficult to do a full comprehensive audit in a day, and just, I know there's not a particular amount of time that you're supposed to spend, but, and I wasn't on the committee when they had their last external, so I don't know if they had any findings then. But seems like a short time to do an internal. And there are no findings.
A lot of stuff to cover. The only other thing I found was a double check on something. 9.3.2 has the laboratory identified and evaluated the following. It's on page 56. It has yes and not applicable. It may be similar to what we discussed before, but it's just a question I was going to ask.
So I suppose the point is that if you have a lab, it's hard to imagine doing as thorough a job with one auditor for one day, compared to some of the labs that we see that there are multiple
taking a month,
auditors.
up to a month.
Yeah, taking time.
Bigger labs.
But as we said, there's no prescription as to the length of time in an audit, as long as it's done. So that's.
But should there be some recommendation?
Well, should we have them?
We can discuss that if you want. So the concept at the moment is that perhaps this one auditor for one day is maybe while it meets the letter of the requirement, it's maybe not doing the best. It's maybe not best practices. Is that the general?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say that the job wasn't done properly, but it just confounds me that there's a lot to do here, and given, unless somebody worked more than an 8-hour day or something, to review all the cases necessary from each analyst, to make sure, look at all the validation, all the studies and stuff. It's just to make sure everything's in place.
So why don't we make a recommendation to have them be available
for discussion next time?
For discussion at the next meeting, because basically it would be good to get a little more
feedback,
explanation and feedback on that.
I couldn't agree more. Before we start saying that this isn't the best practice, I think we ought to get some more information.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we can. There's no need to vote or anything. We just would like. We should ask that the next meeting, could we have a representative from Onondaga here to explain their procedures regarding this audit and why they think, if they think it's adequate, because there are some concerns that it may not be as thorough as it could be, but we don't know until we speak to them.
I'd like to, even though we don't have to vote on this, but I would move that we table further discussion of this report.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Any discussion on that? If not, all those in favour of tabling this? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, the next item, the next lab is the Nassau County Office of the Medical Examiner. And we have...
Karen Delang, Nassau County Medical Examiner.
Can I have just this question? There was one finding of a documented continuing education situation. So there's no response in here. I didn't see any response in my documentation regarding what would you do to? I know you can't go back in time.
Okay. So there's. As far as this is concerned, just so you know the situation, this was a woman that was, pregnant, new mom, and she thought that after she had the baby that she would attend continuing education. That didn't happen. So that's the situation here. She was able to get 2 hours of online continuing education done, but not a pervasive problem because we've never had this finding before. So we submitted our audit also to the FBI, and they reviewed it, and what they wanted to see was they wanted to see that the following year that she had had her continuing education, and the year before she had also, I mean, she's been with us for many years and never not had her continuing education. So, I mean, this we can't really remediate unless we have a time machine to go back. But, you know, everyone else was in compliance, and she's already in compliance for 2012.
I have another question in my confusion of Appendix D. It's Section 2. Christopher Chills, I don't know how to pronounce the last name. I don't want to butcher it, but
That's a good question. The auditors, when they went through our prior audits, felt that the prior auditors had not documented him properly, so they re-reviewed his credentials and felt they needed to document him in that section.
okay, and so this date next to the name is the previous time that they were reviewed, August?
Yes.
Then
I guess they felt that, they felt he wasn't, I guess they didn't list him in 2006, and they felt so he needed to be listed, this needed to be listed, and then document that they reviewed him again for the 2 reviews.
Okay, so now he
So
has
the
two
reviews,
external
right.
reviews now.
They didn't feel that the prior auditors had documented it, and I believe he was missing from this, the September date. They should have
Right.
put him down, and they
Okay.
didn't. And our fault too, we didn't catch that they didn't put him down, so.
All right.
But they did their due diligence and put him to make sure that he is, you know, reported for the 2 successive audits. That was a good question.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions? No? Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that concludes this section of our meeting regarding internal audits. The next item on the agenda, item 5, is new business, and it refers to annual reporting for DNA laboratories. And this is a new thing for us. So,
Give you a little background on it. The Commission on Forensic Science sees the annual reporting information once a year, and generally the first meeting of the year. And it's been thought for some time that we should break out just for the DNA lab so you can see what we're presenting to the Commission, because it does capture, it's really a snapshot of what has occurred in the laboratories and all documentation received. What we highlight, if there's any PT issues at the top, as well as the casework issues. And then the rest of the information correspondence is just the tracking of correspondence that we've received. So if there is something additional you think you want to see, then you would certainly ask for that, and we could bring it up next meeting. A lot of these issues you might already be aware of if it's something that was
Yes.
when it, you know, but this is more of a summary. And I would hope to do that every year for you as well, if you want to see this. So what's broken out here, anything that's attached is maybe some supporting documentation that we feel we can't explain in a little box. And we tried to pull out, just put only the DNA issues for you and pull out any, you know, any other issues that weren't, you know,
Yes.
under your purview.
I found it quite useful myself because it summarises PTs, tests, any significant issues, and usually we've seen them, and just basically it's an audit trail of when it occurred, the documentation. So I found it quite useful.
I agree. It's nice having everything all organized in a simple spreadsheet, and you can kind of see everything that has been going on.
In fact, as a result, I had one question, and is Westchester still with us? Maybe not.
Oh,
Westchester?
yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Westchester. Is that, it pertains to one of these proficiency tests where there was a statement made in a letter to Phil Kinsey, you know, the PRC co-chair from Bob Adamo, and it said that no corrective action was deemed necessary because the error was only that of transcribing information, you know, and not the analysis itself. So my question is, transcription error is still an error, and one would hope that something would have to, you know, there would have to be some investigation. Okay, you found a transcription error, but for continuous improvement, one would have to say, well, what we're going to do to try and prevent this. You can never preclude error completely, but if you find an error, you want to try and institute some procedure or practice to at least minimize it. So it said no corrective action. Did that mean nothing whatsoever was done regarding this? What did that mean? It seems as if nothing was done.
Well, we did do an investigation to see how the error occurred, and what we found was that the analyst filled out, put the wrong allele designation on the CTS form. So we saw the electrophorograms, and she did indeed detect the correct allele, but it was put on the CTS form incorrectly. It was one of those alleles, like it was supposed to be a 31.2, and she put it incorrectly. She might have put a 32.2. So the analyst was spoken to, and also the tech reviewer and the admin reviewer were spoken to, and they were told that they have to, you know, review things more carefully.
Right, because this error is an error not only by the analyst, it's by the reviewers also. So that was my point, I suppose. So you've beefed this up a little bit. At least the reviewers are aware that they have the responsibility to try and ensure. I mean, that's 3 people who missed that. So, and it does happen, but it was just funny to see something. No corrective action was. I just found it surprising myself to say no corrective action was required, as opposed to saying we've retrained or we've re-emphasized something about the review process by all three individuals. Any other comments?
All 3 individuals were spoken to, and it was discussed at a weekly meeting.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with the form. Is it a handwritten error, or is this an error in a computerized form?
It was a computerized form that was typed.
And it looked to me as though it was a matter of just hitting the next key, not something drastically different. Basically, the type of typographical errors I make all the time.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what allele it was. I don't have it in front of me, but I know it was like...
I think it was a 20 versus 30.
Alleles, like 31.2, and she might have typed 31.1 or something. I forget exactly how she did it.
It was a 31.2, 32.2 problem.
Yeah, but it was not...
It's 1 key. You're right.
Yeah, it was 1 key over.
Yeah, so it's 31 instead of 32. Okay, any other comments? No? Okay, thank you, Westchester County again.
Welcome.
So then, any other comments or questions regarding these surveys, these reports to DCGS, which we'll be receiving once a year now? Any other comment?
I have a comment that goes back to the quality assurance audits. Just in general, that it would be nice if everyone was diligent about filling out the auditor's certification forms. Some of the labs do it and some don't. And since I don't know everybody in all the labs and what their qualifications are and their competencies, I can only assume they're competent to do the audit. And it would be nice at least that they have that documented, what their qualifications are to do the audit. Similar, I mean, taking it as seriously and being as detailed as you would conducting an external audit.
So what you're saying is that this quality assurance, the audit document should be completed in full, basically?
In full, yes.
Any other comment about that? Or? Just place it in the record that there's a recommendation to complete the audit document in full, to include details of the auditor themselves.
Yes, and I noticed that, some labs recruit quite a few people. I'm not saying that every single one of them, but whoever is, maybe there's like 3 or 4 staff who are directing the audit and then have people assisting them doing things, that at least those people fill out the auditor self-certification.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let the record reflect recommendation. So the next there's 2 items left on the agenda. One is the executive session, and the last item is the next meeting date and location. Procedurally, what has happened, there has been a request for us to go into executive session, and my understanding of executive sessions is that we go into executive session if there is a possibility of disciplinary action following an investigation or an issue within a laboratory, or whether or not public disclosure could compromise an investigation. That's my understanding of why we go into executive session. And Gina, please correct me.
That's correct.
And so we are required to go into executive session right now, which means all members of the non-committee members and the CGS are of course going to stay, but members of the public would have to leave. But we're going to have to reconvene the meeting to talk about the next meeting date and location. So you can take that on advisement whether you want to remain for that last item on the agenda. But that's what we're going to do now. Okay. So I should like to thank members of the laboratory and the public. May or may not see you back at the very end of the meeting.
I would like to make a motion to go into executive session.
Discussion? All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we're in executive session now, almost.
Except
No.
people we need.
They should all be chastised for not sticking around.
Okay, I should like to reconvene the public meeting again. We've just come out of executive session, and no recommendations came out of that session, so there's no need for public disclosure of the contents of that executive session. So the next item on the agenda is the last item, is the next meeting date and location, and we actually have uniquely a next meeting date and location, May the 18th, 2012, here in New York City. That's the next meeting and date, and I think with that, I should like to adjourn the meeting and thank everyone for attending and for a very productive meeting. Thank you. Thank you. Oh yeah, I've got to.